Everybody loves cheap land. I mean, 10 acres for the price of a pickup truck seems like a hell of a deal. But the reality that I constantly see is cheap land is cheap for a reason. And usually the reason that land's cheap is because the exit's broken. In other words, if at some point in time in the future you've got to move to sell that land, you're going to have a hard time doing it. That's the reason that land is cheap now. And by the time most people figure it out, they're trapped. This is exactly one of the reasons I try to get people just to slow down just a little bit when they're looking for land. And just to set the table for you, if you're relocating to Central Texas or you're looking to buy some Texas Hill Country land, I offer a free 30-minute Texas Hill Country Legacy Blueprint call. In it, we'll identify your best areas, we'll identify any risks, but most importantly, we'll plan out a clear path for you. So the link is down in the description if you want to book it. And with that said, once you understand why land becomes unsellable, then you're going to stop looking at cheap land. You're going to start looking at land that actually has options available for you. Now, if you're watching this, you're not brand new to this. You know that land and houses do not operate the same way when it comes to buying them. There's no standardized pricing, there's really no guaranteed liquidity, and there is absolutely no safety net if you get it wrong. And what most buyers don't understand about land is how it can become absolutely unsellable, even if you get one foundational box wrong on this thing. And by the way, that box is very rarely priced. I mean, sure, if you drop the price low enough, you can sell anything. But again, if you buy it for low enough, guess what? If you go to sell it, you're going to have to sell it low enough also. You're not realizing any profit there. And jumping into it, look, land does not become unsellable on accident, all right? There is always a pattern. This is never a random thing. It's not like people one day wake up and go, oh, you know what? No, I don't want 10 acres in the Texas Hill Country. That price of that land is just going to plummet. In nearly every case, that land is going to fail one of 4 non-negotiables when it comes to being able to resell that land in the future. The first one's legal access, and yep, I know you can scream on YouTube all you want that it should be illegal or it is illegal in your state to sell land that doesn't have legal access. That doesn't mean it's still not done on a daily basis. Buying a piece of land without legal access is a real deal. It happens all the time, and it will absolutely ruin any potential for a large profit down the road, unless you've got enough money to buy legal access from somebody that controls it. The second one's utilities, and a lot of people just make mistakes on utilities. They don't understand how far they have to bring in electric, or how deep that water well has to go, or how expensive it is to put in a septic on that piece of property. So it's not just lack of availability to get the utilities. It's generally that the utilities cost a hell of a lot more than what people who are buying that land think they're going to cost up front. The next one's buildability, and I see this a lot with people who are trying to, buy something maybe that's waterfront or near water, or build something that's got a lot of terrain and you've got big massive views looking out, and whether that's Texas or somewhere in the mountains. Everybody loves views, but buildability can also send budgets way over the edge, and that's why maybe somebody's selling a piece of land cheap is because they had a plan to build there, but when they started getting those pricing back for for engineering and for actually building and sinking piers or building a foundation, whatever that looks like, that ran way over budget. So buildability is the third one. And the fourth one's market depth. Look, if there's not a buyer for that land, if it's so remote that nobody wants to buy it, then the price is going to come down. It's supply and demand. So market depth says that if you don't have enough buyers for it, or if there are 0 buyers for it, if you have to sell it bad enough, you're going to start dropping that price until you find one. And the bad thing is even if one of these 4 things is wrong, generally price alone is not going to be enough to fix it. If you want to sell it, you're going to have to dump a lot of money into it to cure it. That's what I was talking about earlier with access. You're going to have to dump a lot of money in to cure it in addition to lowering the price. All right, let's break these down one by one now. Go a little bit deeper into them. So the first one's legal access. And look, in my experience, not having legal access is the number one reason that land becomes unsellable. And again, I'll go back to it. Yes, I know there are people that buy land that has legal access issues and they buy it up as cheap as they can, and then they go and try to cure whatever that legal access issue is. That doesn't mean that they're all successful. Yeah, you'll hear a few people online saying, oh, I bought it for $5,000 and I spent $10,000 and then sold it for $40,000. Okay, great, you made $20,000. But what if you didn't have a buyer for it? You've got to be really seasoned if that's your way of making money in this thing. And what matters here on access is insurable access, documented access, legal access. I'm telling you, Just because somebody's grandfather used that dirt road for 30 or 40 years does not mean that that access is legal and deeded. Somebody could fence that thing off. Verbal agreements absolutely don't work. Handshake deals, as much as I love them and as much as I'll shake a man's hand and mean what I say, that doesn't buy you anything in the court of law, and it doesn't give you legal access on a property. In fact, the only way to buy property that doesn't have legal access, because when you go to close this thing in your state, whether this is a title company or a fee office or attorneys or whatever, if they can't prove legal access and documented legal access, if there's a lender involved, that lender's not going to lend on it. That's not insurable for them. That's the best way for them to lose money. So the only way you can actually close something that doesn't have legal access is with cash. And if your only buyer is somebody with cash, your buyer pool shrinks immensely. That's why these prices drop so much. That's why that land becomes cheap. If you have, again, it's supply and demand. If you have a very small pool of buyers with cash, if they have cash, usually they're pretty savvy buyers. They're not going to go in there and give you market value for that land. They're going to beat you up. You know that you're going to take a beating on that. All right, the next one we talked about was utilities, and I don't know how many times I've seen in a land listing, utilities nearby. I don't think there's a more misleading phrase in real estate than utilities nearby. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. What it typically means is that the listing agent went and talked to the owner, and they got to talking about utilities, and the owner said, oh yeah, they're located nearby. Doesn't really mean anything. Everything in utilities is priced by how far away is it or how hard is it to get to. Take electricity. Here at my house, I had to run electric about 500 feet up a hill. Okay, that cost me $3,000 or $4,000, but that was also 10 years ago. Now that cost has gone up, and 500 feet's not very far. They put in three power poles. That's it. And ran it 500 feet and put a transformer in. Okay, if you've got to run it 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, now you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to move utility, I've got a client who is trying to move. They bought a piece of land where the utility line ran right down the middle of the property. And they were like, oh, I'll get it moved. So they went and talked to the utility company about moving it. Utility company was happy to move it. Their base bid was $80,000 just to move it about 150 feet to one side. So how far do you have to bring something in? How far do you have to move it? With water, is it available? Okay, maybe there's municipal water supply at the front of your property. How far back do you have to take that water? Because out here, if your land looks like this and you've got rocks and you've got terrain and everything else, okay, you're going to have to rent a rock saw. And anytime you go start cutting into ground where there's rocks, it's going to take you a long time to run that water line up. How far does it have to go? How long is it going to take the contractor to do it? Sure, you can rent your own rock saw if you want, but still, the longer you've got to run that line, the further you've got to run it, the longer it's going to take, the more expensive it's going to be. Then you run into the problem of, if you don't have municipal utility, what about water wells? Okay, out here I can tell you they're digging wells about 800 feet deep right now and more, and that's costing people $30,000 to $35,000. Okay, if you only have to go 100 feet, that's not so bad. But if you're in some parts of the country, where you're digging through granite or basalt or something like that, really hard rocks to get down, it's going to get really, really expensive. And the same thing for wastewater. Okay, if you've got wastewater available at the road, not a big deal. But do you have to put in a septic system? All right, if you do, what kind? Does it have to be aerobic? Can it be just an engineered gravity fed system? Do you have to pump it all out below ground and build a sand bed over the top with emitters underneath it? And again, you're looking at $25,000, $30,000. With utilities, if you don't know these things up front, and then you go with your budget after you buy this land to get the utilities figured out, I've seen a lot of buyers go, holy crap, I thought I was going to need about $50,000 for utilities and I need over $100,000. It blew my budget. I've got to get rid of this land. Okay, now as a seller, when you know all of this information, you have to disclose it, at least in the state of Texas you do. Now, talk to your realtor if you're in another state, maybe you don't. But in Texas, you've got to disclose this stuff. If you've got reports on this, you have to hand it over to the buyer. Guess what? Every buyer that comes by at that point, unless they're independently wealthy, they look at exactly what it's going to cost them to put in those utilities, and they go, nope, it's not worth it. I'll offer you, instead of $150,000, I'll offer you $70,000 because that other $80,000 is going to pay for my utilities. And again, this is why cheap land isn't always worth it. And now one other note I'll give you, and this is based on my experience. I look at a lot of property in Colorado, and I've got plans working on building some cabins up there. One of the things that some of the sellers are doing is they're going ahead and they're engineering septic systems. They're getting permits for wells, and in some cases they're even putting the wells in. Now, if a well costs you $30,000 and a septic system costs you $30,000, what they're doing then is, instead of raising the price of that land $60,000, they may raise it $100,000, because what do they know? Well, they know that the permits are in place. They know how long it took to get those permits in place. They knew that there was an extra outlay of cash involved. They also know that there's a certain time frame that those permits are good for. They also took out all of the legwork in finding a company to dig the well, companies to install the septic, companies to engineer the septic, and all these other things. So what you as a buyer then, if you're looking at a more expensive piece of land, what you're getting is you're getting ready to go septic, ready to go water. Now all you got to worry about is electric. And I've even seen sellers that are putting electric drops on. Okay, that is going to be the opposite of a cheap piece of land. But as a buyer, I'm starting to tend towards looking more at that, because if I'm looking in Colorado and I'm in Texas, yes, I've got local resources on the ground there, and that's the most important thing you can have. But I can also speed up my operation by probably about a year if all of those things are in place already. And I know that, and time is money and time is valuable. So I'm willing to do that. So I stopped looking at cheap land. I'm looking at land that actually serves a purpose at this point. And then the third one was buildability. I mentioned flood risks. Okay, if the land is in a floodway, you're not going to build a structure on it. In fact, in most parts of the state of Texas, if it's in a floodway, you can't even build a concrete slab on there to park an RV on. Is it in the floodplain? What floodplain is it in? Is it in a 50-year floodplain? Is it in a 100? Is it in a 500? All of those make a difference in terms of your insurance. So make sure you understand, if you're buying waterfront land or land down at the bottom of a hill, make sure you understand what the flood risks are. And you can look on FEMA.gov, I believe, to find out exact addresses of the flood risk. Before you start building anything, before you buy that land, when you have that information, go to your insurance broker, and you need an insurance broker. You need them local, and talk to them. Look, I want to build a 1,200 square foot cabin. What am I going to have to do to make sure that I'm not paying $10,000 a year in flood insurance? And if you do have to do that, that may make all of that land just completely out of the realm of possibility for you. So make sure, if there's flood risks, that you address those up front, and you make sure that you're able to assume the amount of cash outlay that your insurance is going to cost you. The next one is topography. Again, everybody loves a great view, and usually, especially if this is like a second home or a weekend cabin, you may not be worried about not having a backyard, but what is it going to cost to go in there and build stem walls if you're going to dig down and cut out a basement? What is it going to cost to go in there and put in piers if you're going to raise it up and build up off of the ground? Or are you just going to come in and build a concrete slab? I mean, in parts of Texas, I've seen concrete slabs that are 20 feet tall. It's the most asinine thing you've ever seen. And I can tell you that concrete and that steel is not cheap anymore. So what is it going to cost you to have that dream piece of land with that huge view out, to the east, where you get that sunrise view? The other thing from that buildability standpoint is, what about setbacks? I've seen some really unique shapes of properties. And, again, you may have something where part of the property is in a floodplain, but at the front, it's got, it's raised elevation, and, it's a narrow piece of land, but it's raised elevation. I'm not in the floodplain. I'm good to go. And then, again, the worst thing you can do is buy land without a survey, but I've seen people with cash do that because it's a good deal. And then they go in and get a survey done, and they find out that there's building setbacks that don't allow them to build within that elevated area. They have to build down in the floodplain. Again, I'm telling you, if it is a cheap piece of land, somebody has vetted it, and there's a reason that it's cheap. You really have to vet all this stuff out before you go and buy it. Another reason land gets cheap, and I didn't mention this earlier, but there's often appraisal issues, especially if it gets really remote. If you, and this is a very popular thing to do with people that have cash, they'll go in, they'll buy the land cash, they'll put in infrastructure, all the utilities, and they may even build their house for cash. But then they want to get their cash back out so they can go invest it in something else, so they're going to go get a loan on it. Well, then there's going to be an appraisal done. Okay, and if you're in an area with a thin market, and this kind of translates into that market depth, if you're in an area that has a thin market and there's just no comps to be found, how's a bank going to lend on that property? They have the ability to do as built, and you can show them what you paid for the land, you can show them what you paid to improve it, and they'll lend you money based on that. But they're usually going to be very, very reserved with how much they're going to give you. Again, you think about it from the bank's perspective. What they do is they limit their liability. They'll give you money, but they don't want to lose that money if they have to foreclose on that property. So if it's in an area that there's just no buyers and there hasn't been a sale in, I don't know, 5 years, if it's remote enough, then they're going to lend you very little money, because if they have to take that property back over and sell it, they know that they're going to have to discount that price way down. So again, you can find out about this by just looking at, okay, is that land priced like other land that's a little bit closer into metros, even if it's only an hour different? Sure, there's going to be a discount. But if it's priced reasonably close, okay, that's not a bad thing. But if there's a huge difference, let's say it's 10% of what stuff closer in is priced at, okay, that's the first thing that needs to be setting off those alarm bells. Like, hey, if my plan is to do this, buy this cash, and then go refinance it, maybe there's going to be issues. Are there available comps? The best way to find out is contact a realtor. I talk about it all the time. You don't have to use a realtor, but in most states, Texas being a non-disclosure state, realtors have comps. They can go and they can find comps. They can find out when the last property near that one sold. And I can't do that in Colorado. Again, we go back to those local resources. And by the way, if you need lenders or builders or realtors, lawyers, and lenders, anything in any of the 50 states, let me know. I've got contacts out there. Obviously, if it's in Texas, I can help you. But anyway, you need those local resources so that you can get out there and kind of, again, vet this stuff out before it becomes a problem, before you close on that property. And again, this is why I said earlier that price cuts don't fix any of these things. Price cuts don't fix access. Access still has to be cured. Price cuts don't fix the fact that you're bringing electric from a half mile away and it's going to cost you $30,000, or that that unsightly power line right through the middle of your property where you want to put your house has to be moved and it's $80,000. Right? Price cuts don't fix giant slopes on land. They're not going to, just because you bought the land cheap doesn't mean the builder's going to give you a better deal on it. You're still going to pay full price for construction on that land. So again, going back to it, that's why land is cheap, because price cuts don't really fix all the additional problems that come along with it. But look, you could find the golden goose, or the goose that lays a golden egg. You could find the perfect piece of land in a great location for you that doesn't have all of these issues, and somebody priced it cheap. Like, you could be the one that finds that. How do you quickly vet that? So let's talk about it real quick. The first thing is, can the land be financed right now? Go to a lender, and even if you're going to buy with cash, go to a lender, show them the property and say, will you lend on this? Let them do their job. If they'll lend on it, okay, that limits one of your liabilities right there. The fact that, there are some comps that you can potentially get this thing sold in the future. Another good litmus test is go to a local builder and say, hey, this is the property that I want to buy. Can you approximate what it will cost me to buy on this land? If that's a local builder, if they're not sure, they can drive by and they can give you a rough idea. But if they drive by and they go, oh, holy hell, no, this is going to take me 3 or 4 weeks to bid out. Okay, that's an indicator. If it takes them that long to bid out a piece of property, unless they're just seriously busy, but if it takes them that long to bid out a property because they're having to get with engineers and all this other stuff, that land had better be a smoking hot deal. The other thing is, look, again, if you have to get rid of this property for some reason, or if that's your end goal, can the buyer, and we call this buyer, or I call this buyer eyes, right? Can a buyer look at this land and figure out exactly what it is in under a minute and how they're going to utilize it? If that buyer has to spend 45 minutes to an hour out there walking around trying to understand, what your plan is or what your plan was, then again, it's probably not worth the money that somebody's asking for it. And again, I go back to this. If any of the answers to those is no, there is a reason it is cheap land. And again, personally, I would avoid it unless you are a very unique person that really understands how you can make money off of it when nobody else can.